Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I hope all of you are doing well. Today's video covers the first part of the lesson regarding Victorian age. We will discuss today the historical background, the major social and political events that influenced the whole society, and of course literature as well during the Victorian age. Important literary features will be discussed along with the discussion about the famous writers of the age. Today's lesson will cover the major novelists of the time, their writing style, their major themes and famous novels, whereas a part 2 of the lesson will cover major poets, prose writers and playwrights. So let's start today's lesson. Reign of Queen Victoria was from 1837 to 1901. This period is considered the next golden period of Britain after the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. The British Empire expanded and was the predominant power of the world during this period. Britain was advanced in industry and engineering in particular. There were so many industrial developments and the age was brimming with commercial activity and prosperity. Historical background of the age, there were so many materialistic developments, but along with materialistic developments there was also social injustice that was rampant during that era. Then we are going to discuss about the movement of Chartism, that was very important social and political event of the time. We are going to discuss about the intellectual developments which took place and which influenced the whole society and literature. And we are also going to discuss now about the social and political reforms. Victorian age saw rapid technological development with a wide range of new inventions. Great Britain became the foremost industrial and trading nation of the world. Mid-Victorian era from 1850 to 1870 is entitled as Britain Golden Years, with national income per person increasing by half. So this was the result of all the technological and industrial development. This prosperity was driven by increased industrialization and exports to the empire and elsewhere. The positive economic conditions led to social stability. The Great Exhibition of 1851 in Crystal Palace was one of the major events of the age, when the manufactured goods were displayed to show the prosperity enjoyed by the whole nation. Students, here it is very important to remember that though there was technological advancement and upper class was prosperous, but there was also social injustice and extreme level of social inequality that prevailed during the Victorian age. Especially the working class people, they faced poor living conditions, including little access to clean water, food and sanitation, with little opportunity to improve their lives. They were living a very difficult life and faced so many problems. There were so many workers who used drugs like opium and alcohol to escape from reality, to cope with the hardships of life that they were suffering from. Then their homes were infested with vermin and leading to outbreak of diseases, and poor classes faced marginalization. Then child labor was also prevalent at that time. It was common. Children in rural areas especially worked for long hours and they were paid very low wages. Women were expected to follow strict social rules and they faced discrimination. So these were the problems faced by the common masses in that era. Chartism was a very important movement. A working class movement emerged in 1836 and was at peak between 1838 and 1848. The aim of this movement was to gain political rights and influence for the working classes, because before that the working class did not have any right to vote. Similarly, women did not have any right to vote. So Chartism was the movement led by the working class people in order to have some rights. Their demands included the right to vote, equal electoral district, annually elected parliament, and abolition of property given to the members of the parliament. So they were against this social injustice that was rampant in the society, and the elite class was provided with all the facilities and all the luxuries, whereas the poor people were suffering. So the demands of Chartism were widely publicized through meetings and pamphlets. So it was a very important and powerful political movement. Here it is really important to discuss about the intellectual developments of the age. Two major works which were published in the Victorian era, and they had a great influence on society. First was Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. This book was published in 1859, and it brought about a revolution in scientific thought. The book talked about evolution and natural selection that resulted in a clash between faith and reason. Then there was another important book published by Karl Marx. Its title was Das Kapital, and it was published in 1867 as a negative critique of capitalist economy, and contributed to the ongoing movements for equality and the end of discrimination and oppression. Darwin and Marx, they were two important authors who made human beings of that time realize that they do not have to accept oppression. They can also question it. They can also raise their voice against oppression. They can also do something practical against oppression. So these two men provided a new way of looking at power and power structures. Social reforms of the age included Foster's Education Act, which was passed in 1870 by the Parliament, which made education mandatory for children of ages 5 to 12 in Great Britain. Public education systems were built in newly industrialized and urbanized countries and in their colonies. The state provided elementary education to all. Public health acts were passed. Another important social reform was the abolition of slavery. When Slavery Abolition Act came into effect in 1834, this was a major social reform that took place in Britain during this age, and then voting also became secret in 1871. Students, here it is important to discuss a paradox of the age that is also termed as Victorian compromise. Now, what was it? On one hand, the Victorian age was an age brimming with commercial success and prosperity. On the other hand, it was also the time when people were suffering from extreme anxiety and torture, not only in British colonies, but also the poor people, working class people, and the children even inside Britain. The intellectuals felt that it was a compromise, a kind of a double standard that was going on, as on one hand Britain projected this image of glory, this image of progress, and on the other hand it suffocated its own people. So this double standard between the national progress on one hand and oppression of the individuals on the other hand, this conflict between philanthropy and oppression might be seen as Victorian compromise that was a paradox of the age. Students, up till now we have discussed the historical background of the Victorian age in detail. Now let's talk about the important characteristics of literature which was produced during Victorian age. Social problem novels were written which were based upon the themes of poverty and suffering of working class people. The novelists Charles Dickens and Elizabeth Gaskell talked about these themes in their novels in detail. Then another concept of Victorian morality and revolt was important literary feature. This is associated with family values, charity, and sexual repression. So this was a kind of morality which was claimed by the age. However, these values conflicted with the social tendencies of the time. Means the thing which was actually happening in the age was totally in contrast to the concept of Victorian morality. And what was that? Prostitution was rampant, child labor was rampant, and exploitation of lower classes was also there. So the writers such as Tennyson, etc., adhered to Victorian morality, whereas the writers such as Thomas Carlyle, Matthew Arnold, and William Makepeace Thackeray satirized the snobbishness of the age, and they protested against Victorian morality. Another important literary feature was the influence of science and religion on literature. Darwin's work influenced Tennyson, Carlyle, and Arnold. The Oxford movement was another religious reform movement which was against existing beliefs of Church of England, and this movement also influenced many writers of the age. Then another very important literary feature was the popularity of the genre of novel. As paper and printing cost became cheaper, so the demand for books increased and novels became more popular. Students, here is a table that presents the major Victorian writers. First of all, we are going to discuss the names of the major novelists of the age. The greatest novelist of the age was Charles Dickens. Then William Makepeace Thackeray. He also wrote very impressive novels. George Eliot, whose real name was Mary Ann Evans. She was a woman, but she used pen name of George Eliot in order to hide her gender. Then there were Bronte sisters, who were also famous novelists of the age. Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, and Anne Bronte. Then another major novelist of the time was Thomas Hardy. Lewis Carroll was another name, important name, and Arthur Conan Doyle, who created some very famous characters in history of English literature. The famous poets of Victorian age included Alfred Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning, who invented a new form of poetry, that was the dramatic monologue. Then Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who was the wife of Robert Browning. Then another important name was Matthew Arnold, who was, besides being a poet, he was also a very famous critic. Then Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Christina Rossetti. Christina Rossetti was a famous poet of the age, and she was the sister of Gabriel Rossetti. Then prose writers included Thomas Carlyle and Thomas Babington Macaulay. Playwright of the age, important and very famous playwright of the age was Oscar Wilde. Main characteristics of Victorian novel include realism, social issues, moral purpose, satire, and influence of science. As far as realism was concerned, Victorian novels were famous for portraying the realistic depiction of daily life. So realism was an important feature of the novels written during that age. Then the novels also portrayed social issues. They addressed social issues of the time, such as child labor, women's rights, and educational reforms, etc. Then Victorian novel also projected a moral purpose, means they showed morality and virtue triumphant in the stories. Then some of the Victorian novels also satirize the vices of the time. That is why we can say that satire was also one of the important characteristics of Victorian novel. Then there was also the influence of science, as discussed before. New ideas from thinkers like Darwin and Freud and Karl Marx, they had a significant impact upon Victorian literature. So these were all the major characteristics of Victorian novel. Charles Dickens was recognized as a literary genius, and he was also called the greatest novelist of the Victorian age. He wrote on the themes of social injustice and discrimination. His major works include A Christmas Carol, David Copperfield, Oliver Twist, Hard Times, Bleak House, Tale of Two Cities, and Great Expectations. George Eliot was another important novelist of the age. Her real name was Mary Ann Evans, but she wrote under the pen name George Eliot to conceal her gender. Her works are known for their realism, psychological insight, and the detailed depiction of the countryside. She wrote 7 novels, including Adam Bede, The Mill on the Floss, Silas Mariner, Romola, Felix Holt the Radical, Middlemarch, and Daniel Deronda. Bronte sisters were also among the famous novelists of the age. Charlotte Bronte, she wrote under the pen name Currer Bell, and the major novels that she wrote were Jane Eyre and Villette. The next was Emily Bronte. She wrote under the pen name Alice Bell, and her famous novel was Wuthering Heights. Anne Bronte, another sister, she wrote under the pen name Acton Bell, and her major novel was Agnes Grey. Thomas Hardy was another important and famous novelist of the age. He was influenced by Romanticism. He was also a poet, and her poetry was also influenced by William Wordsworth, and he wrote many novels which also showed the effect of Romanticism upon Hardy. He was highly critical of much in Victorian society, especially on the declining status of rural people. So he protested against that in his writings. Many of his novels concern tragic characters struggling against their passions and social circumstances, and they are often set in the semi-fictional region of Wessex. His major novels include Far from the Madding Crowd, The Mayor of Casterbridge, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and Jude the Obscure. Arthur Conan Doyle was another important novelist of the age. He wrote 4 novels and 56 short stories, creating the famous characters Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. His novels include A Study in Scarlet, The Sign of the Four, The Hound of the Baskervilles, and The Valley of Fear. So students, in today's lesson we have discussed the main features of the Victorian literature and the social conditions which prevailed during that era. Now you should note down the important points discussed today and learn them properly. In part 2 of the lesson, we will discuss the major poets, playwright, and the prose writers of the Victorian age. I hope you have understood today's lesson. Allah Hafiz.